I'm going to try to make this not a rant. Um, what I am going to say is that the U.S. reaction to the coronavirus 19 um, situation is absolutely an overreaction to something, and it's being uh, overblown in terms of risk to the 350 million people in this country. And I'm going to go through the timeline and why that is absolutely the truth. And before you folks that are doctors start to weigh in, uh, I'm going to say this. Do you know what they call somebody who graduates at the bottom half of their class in medical school? Doctor. So don't get that twisted. I don't really care if you're a medical doctor or not. I don't care if you're with the World Health Organization or the CDC. What I'm about to say is still the truth, and they are the facts. And we're letting politics and political correctness get in the way of doing what we should have done and what should happen going forward. The United States is not at risk of becoming Wuhan. The United States is not at risk of becoming Italy. So we need to stop focusing on what's happening there and talk about what we are in the United States. First, let's talk about the timeline. It was at the end of December, December 31st, when they had their first unknown source of pneumonia. Now remember, the coronavirus 19 is a respiratory predator, but at that time, the Chinese had no clue on what was going on. Uh, 2 weeks later, they had the first death, but then this was an older person, and they attributed it to, their condition. Between the 11th of January and the 23rd of January, which is 2 weeks later, the Chinese medical community said, "Holy crap, we got a bad thing," and it's centered in Wuhan. Now, for those of you that don't remember, Wuhan is not some little village out in podunk nowhere, China. Wuhan is a city of almost 12 million people, most of whom do manufacturing for US and other companies. It is a manufacturing city. Wuhan is huge. Now, culturally, uh, you don't have people are constant, 10 million people are concentrated together. And they have what they call wet markets. That is where you go out, they're open air markets, and they buy food and so forth that's some still alive and some maybe not so much. But it is part of the culinary culture of China, if you've never been there or to a Chinatown in the US. Um, then around the 23rd of January, the Chinese government said, we got a major problem in Wuhan, and they dropped the hammer. They just isolate. Now remember, they isolated a city of 10 million people and plus. That's like closing down all access to the city of Los Angeles. Picture what would be necessary to literally close down all access into and out of the city of Los Angeles, whether by surface or by air or by sea. But that's what the Chinese did. That's what the Chinese did. Why? Because they're a communist country and they can do that kind of stuff. But the point is, they did what was necessary because they figured out this thing is isolated here and we need to nip it in the bud. So what happened a little later, right? Well, let me see what I have here. Oh, 2 weeks later, a little less than 2 weeks later, the U.S., because remember the whole world is watching this thing. So the U.S. says we're going to restrict travel from China, not just Wuhan, but from China. But by then, in that 2 week period, millions of Chinese and people who are visiting China for what? Chinese New Year, which was to take place 2 weeks later, which was the biggest celebration and holiday in the Chinese and Asian calendar. So you had millions and millions of people coming into China, not just Wuhan, to celebrate Chinese New Year. And then when the hammer got dropped and the gates were starting to come down and people figured out that they were not going to be able to get out of China because the Chinese government was going to sequester Wuhan, people got on anything smoking out of China. And if you were to look, and I wish I could do it, but there is a radar, a live radar map of all the airplanes leaving China. The last time I saw that, I had my own software and I was watching 9/11. I was watching every single airplane in the U.S. airspace blink out because it was landing, except for one, and it was leaving. And that was the jet carrying the Bin Laden family out of the U.S. But that's a subject for another video. My point is that anything smoking was leaving China, period. Where were they going? Well, let's talk about the U.S. Now remember, this was people escaping being stuck in China during Chinese New Year. Millions of Chinese. By the way, Trump got it almost right. I'm not a Trump supporter, but I think he got it almost right. He should never have called it a Chinese virus. He should have called it the China virus, just like we did with the Spanish flu. By the way, it wasn't the Spanish flu. It actually originated in the United States, but our politics wouldn't allow it to call it that. So we picked on the Spanish and called it the Spanish flu, and it stuck. It stuck. We didn't call it the Spaniard flu. We called it the Spanish flu related to the country. And in this case, the China flu is accurate. It is where it originated. It is where it came from to this country, right? It's not some racist thing. It is what it is, right? If it came from Australia, I'd call it the Australian flu. But I digress. The point is, you had millions of people leaving China to escape being stuck there. And then all those planes were in the air. All those planes were in the air. So what happened then? For as far as the U.S. goes, where do you think all those people went? Where do you think? Remember, they were Chinese. Where do you think they were going? Back home. Where is back home? Back home to Chinatown or Chinatown Light. Look at the hot spots in this country. Look at the hot spots in this country. Seattle, San Francisco, New York. Right? New York City has the largest Chinese population in the country. Has the largest Chinatown in the country. Who's next? Oh my God, San Francisco. What about Seattle? Seattle is the entry point for almost all flights coming from Asia, Asia meaning Japan, South Korea, and China, whether it's Taiwan or mainland China. Then the next one is Seattle. The next one is San Francisco. Next is Los Angeles. They have a very large Chinatown. The point is, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out that what we should have done is said, they're all, just like we did in 9/11, any aircraft destined for the United States coming out of China is now grounded. Turn around and go back or we will shoot you down. That is exactly what happened in 9/11. And that's why you saw every airplane just blink out and land. They landed wherever they could find a safe runway. Now what you've got is you've got aircraft, you've got people in China that can't get to the U.S. Well, that's what South Korea and Singapore did. As soon as people arrived in their country, no one got off those airplanes without being screened. Nobody. And if they screened hot, they never went home. They went to an isolation facility. Bang. Nobody. And that's why they're not having the same kind of issues that we do. Right? But we were too politically correct to say, If you're coming from China and your airplane landed, I don't care who you are. You don't get off the airplane until you're screened. And I'm not talking about some temperature thing. Until we can verify that you are not infected, whether you are asymptomatic or not, you don't go home. You go to a facility. And I'm telling you, we could have well handled that small number of people than what we got to deal with now, which is to screw 350 million people because we're afraid a few thousand might die. And I don't care about the folks that might get sick and have symptoms. They're going to survive, right? This is way overreaction. Way overreaction. Oh, now, people say, well, geez, we don't want to be like Italy. You know what? Screw Italy. If you lay down with dogs, you get fleas. What did Italy do? Wuhan replicated itself into northern Italy, where what takes place? It is a manufacturing facility just like Wuhan with 200,000 Chinese. 200,000 Chinese in northern Italy, in that area. And what do? They make the expensive stuff, handbags and other things, that are made in Italy, but made by Chinese. It is Wuhan East. That is the relationship, that is the business relationship that Italy made with China, right? To get cheap labor into Italy to make those goods. And you know what? You lay down with dogs, you get fleas. That's just how it works. So don't complain to me that Italy, and by the way, Italy is a second tier medically capable country. It ain't one of the, you don't want to get too sick in Italy. You want to go someplace else, right? So they didn't have the capacity to deal with it in the first place. And then they get way too many Chinese coming back from Wuhan, because remember, these are Wuhan people that are in northern Italy. They come back from Wuhan because they escaped. They escaped at the last minute and landed there. And guess what they did? They infected the rest of the fucking country. Right? Because nobody wanted to do what the Chinese did to stop it. And those people escaped before China dropped the hammer and locked everybody in. Now, 3 months later, because of what the Chinese did, they have 0 net new cases. That's 90 days. But because we're so soft and weak and emotionally terrified of having dead people, that we could be screwing around with this thing for the, and by the way, this flatten the curve thing, bullshit. Bullshit. That's assuming that our health care facility will experience the same rate that Italy has. And they keep pointing back to Italy. Italy has what they have because they had this massive influx of Chinese from Wuhan into northern Italy. And if you look around the world and you see where are the hot spots that are joined, go to the African continent and see, right? It is where Chinese went to escape from China. And that's where you start to see some of the hot spots. Then ask, well, where did these other cases come from? Right? Well, you talk about people that had to go somewhere. They had to go to some conference. Where? New York, San Francisco, Seattle, LA. Right? You talk about folks that had to go visit their family. Why? Because they were, they had to go somewhere. And when they come back, then they carry the virus with them. The rule should have been, if you leave where you are, you cannot come back until we figure this out. Right? It's the reverse of the Roach Motel. If you leave where you are, you can't come back. So now we're stuck with doing stupid stuff like stay in place. don't get around, social distancing, all that blah blah. And it is blah blah. Why? We know what the risk factors are for this thing. Remember, it's a respiratory predator. So, if you have a compromised immune system for any reason, don't mingle with people. If you know someone that has a compromised immune system or respiratory issues, have you had pneumonia more than once? Do you have asthma? Are you a cancer survivor that had chemotherapy? Whatever the things are, we know who they are, and you know who you are, right? We know who you are. It's up to you to not go mingle with the other 350 million people. You don't say we're going to cancel concerts, we're going to shut down airlines, we're going to do. You know that you have those risk factors. It's up to you to not go there where you might be associated with other people. Yes, there are folks that might have the virus and carry it and not have any symptoms. They're going to be fine, but they don't know. They don't know. It's up to the person that has the risk factors to say to themselves, I'm not going to go and be around people at all because I am personally at risk. So you take on the risk yourself. You don't put the risk on the rest of the country. That's brain dead. That's brain dead. That's a bunch of people that are afraid of death. They're afraid of having anybody die. Poor people, they got sick. They got sick. People die in this country all the time. The other thing is that I don't care if it's 100,000, 200,000 people, we killed more civilians on purpose, and nobody shed a tear. We created 3 million plus refugees on purpose. Nobody shed a tear. But now we're going to get all butthurt because some bug that's a natural thing is going to kill off a few folks that are sick anyway? Nah. We need to stop dealing with that. So what I thought was not going to be a rant turned into one. If it sounds like I'm pissed at this situation, I am, because I don't think that we're doing what's necessary. I think we're overreacting to it. And I think we're overreacting because we're weak pricks emotionally. So, enough of that. If you want to subscribe to the channel, please do. If you want to like, dislike, whatever floats your boat, please do that. But in the meantime, as always, thanks for watching. Carry on.